In this interview, I meet up with Allen Weston, who is the founder and executive director of National Homeschool Association, formerly known as the Home Learning Association. He homeschooled his three children over 17-year period. He has authored a handbook for all the people who are looking to homeschool called Terra Scholar, a complete handbook for today's homeschoolers. Let's welcome Mr. Weston. Thank you so much for joining me today on the summit and for this interview. I wanted to start off by asking you, under the current situation, why homeschooling is a good option?
Wow. How long do we have?
About an hour.
Okay. Um, well, homeschooling is always a good option, whether it's under the circumstances or not. Uh, Basically, the thing that parents need to understand, though, is that homeschooling is a mindset. When you do school at home, it's not homeschooling. And unfortunately, the press and the media have been saying, well, millions of people are doing homeschooling at home now. Well, no, that's not true. They're doing school at home, and the difference is really a mindset, and because homeschooling is a lifestyle. For those that really embrace it and understand what it is, uh, they look at everything differently. Everything is a learning opportunity. Uh, Going to the grocery store, picking a can of soup off of the shelf, looking at the label on the back and talking about what's in there. Just having conversations about nutrition, about chemistry, about all sorts of different things is how kids learn naturally. And that's how they learn to walk and talk and make sense of the world. And for some reason, this people have come to this idea that when they turn 5 or 6 years old, they don't. The parents can't teach them anything anymore. Or the kids can't learn on their own anymore. They suddenly have to have teachers to be able to teach them. And who decided that, I don't know, but it doesn't make sense at all in the real world. Um, so really, if you adopt the idea that homeschooling is a mindset and that you don't need big curriculum material like a packaged curriculum materials necessarily, although there are lots of great ones out there, you don't have to have that. You really need to decide what it is that you want your children to learn. Um, you have to make the decision first off, because there's a lot of faith-based homeschoolers, there's a lot of secular homeschoolers, and if you're looking for curriculum materials, that's a good place to start, is deciding which way you want to go on that. Then the next thing you need to know is pretty much whether or not you want to try and create a traditional sort of school environment where you've got classes and textbooks and worksheets and do that sort of schooling, or do you want to go to the complete end, the other end of the spectrum, which is an unschooling sort of situation where you let the child decide what's interesting to them. You go to the library, if the libraries are open, and you find books on that particular subject, and you run with it. So there's so many benefits to homeschooling. It's a wide open question, and I don't
Yes,
know
yes, it
how to
is.
answer it.
It is. I want to touch on the mindset part. Right now, a lot of parents are, because they tried this forced almost schooling, right, over the COVID lockdown, right?
Yeah.
That's and then there's a lot of fear of sending kids back to school when school really starts, right? And so therefore, that's why a lot of them are thinking. So you're saying that the mindset when going into it, you have to be very careful because what you experience is not necessarily homeschooling.
That's correct.
Yeah.
Yes. What they're doing now is basically just doing what the schools are asking them to do to keep them, in theory, keeping them up to date or up to speed with where they should be, so that when they resume classes, they won't be left behind.
Mm.
Which, I mean, that's another thing that speaks back to homeschooling is who decided what you needed to know by a certain age. We've
Yes.
got homeschoolers that can do calculus. They're 10 years old. but yet
Yes.
they can't read probably past a third or fourth grade reading level.
Mm,
Math is their thing. And
mm,
so that kid would probably be shamed at school because they can't read very well, but yet they're a prodigy when it comes to math, and may
mm,
be able to design the next warp speed engines somewhere down the line, if they were encouraged to do that. So that's another factor of homeschooling that really is overlooked, I think, by a lot of people, is that
mm,
to try and push all the children to do exactly the same things at exactly the same times is not good. It really
mm.
isn't. So,
And then that's why we have a lot of students in the regular school who are unmotivated
of
because they're
course.
learning without meaning, right?
Oh, sure. I mean, the average classroom has got a certain number of kids that are really smart, that
Mhm.
are totally bored because the teacher is teaching to the
Little.
people in the class, the middle, and
Mhm.
then the ones that are really left behind, or that don't understand it, are in fact going to get left behind. I think the Department of Education itself has a statistic on its website that says that 19% of high school graduates, not the dropouts, but the actual graduates, can't read their own diplomas.
Mm.
Well, this is after 13 years of instruction, and
Wow.
I'm sure they can read their name and they can read a few of the other words, but not they can't read the whole thing.
Wow.
So it's really um,
What's
the,
the purpose, right?
the system is broken down. Not that it was ever designed. Public schools were never designed to teach children, and
Mm.
that's parents don't understand that, is that it was designed in Prussia as a way to cultivate and discipline children to do menial labor jobs. It was never designed to actually educate children. And when we
Mhm.
adopted that model here, it would seem like, hey, free daycare, why
Yeah.
not? We'll let them do whatever it is they want to do, and it's turned really bad.
Yeah. And then we have false expectation as parents, right? We're having almost false expectation. My child's going to come out with the diploma.
Oh, sure, sure.
Well, yeah.
Oh yeah, yeah. And the thing about it, and they've done this several studies about it, and that is the parents that actually engage with their children in the evenings, instead of forcing them to do the homework that's being sent
Mm.
home, they actually sit down and work with them, and have discussions about things that are important to them. Those are the children that are really excelling at school,
Mm.
and it makes the schools look like they're doing their job. But uh, the reality is that most kids just really don't learn anything in school, because it's not the school's fault. It's certainly not the teacher's fault. There's lots of really good teachers out there, but the environment is just such that you can't teach children in a classroom with 25 kids. It's just, the environment is just not suitable for that, and the whole structure of the grades and the pride and shame sort of, you can be proud if you get a good grade, but you should be ashamed of yourself if you don't. That whole structure is counterintuitive to how learning is done.
Yeah.
If you think in terms of like a child that learns to tie their shoe for the first time, they just squeal with excitement when they actually have figured it out, not
Mm.
because they're getting a good grade or not because they're getting a gold star, but because they learned something that's valuable to their life. Schools take that away from kids, and it's really
Mm.
a shame.
Mhm. You also homeschooled three of your kids, right?
That's correct.
So
Yes.
all the way from kindergarten all the way?
My son, my oldest, was in second. He had just started second grade, and we had an incident at the school, and we decided to pull him out at that time. My oldest daughter was in kindergarten at that time, so we pulled her out at the same time. My youngest wasn't even born yet, so but
Mhm.
other than him going through first grade and a little bit of second grade, and my daughter being in kindergarten a little bit, we homeschooled pretty much all.
Mhm. And one of the critical thing you talked about was mindset going into this, right? Parents thinking of going into homeschooling. Why do they have to set that mindset correctly so they don't feel like a failure? Because it can happen.
Oh, sure. The whole concept of trying to get kids to do things that they don't want to do
Mm,
sets them up for failure from the
mm,
beginning. And that's why so many kids fail at school, is because it sets them up for failure. If a parent really wants to have their child understand things,
mm,
you need to find out what's interesting to that child. And maybe it's comic books. Maybe the only thing they care about is Superman and Superman comic books. So it's the parent's job at that point to figure out how to integrate what that child is interested in into the rest of the real world. And it could be something as simple as saying, okay, well, let's talk about Superman. What does he do? He shoots laser beams out of his eyes. Now, what are laser beams? How do they work? Why does that burn through things? And just start asking questions and inspire them to learn more. And not necessarily tell them, hey, let's go look that up, but just plant the ideas in their mind. Because from a homeschooling standpoint, it takes about 100 hours, and this has been shown repeatedly over and over again. It takes about 100 hours for a child to learn to read, write, and do basic math.
mm.
Not 13 years and the 100 hours.
Wow.
Once they know how to do those things, they don't really need a teacher anymore. They need inspiration. They need encouragement. And there was a guy by the name of Shigatra Mitra. Have you ever heard of him?
Mhm.
He did some really incredible experiments with putting a computer in a wall at a school and just left it there and said to the kids, I don't know what it does. You figure it out.
Yes.
And these were kids that didn't speak English, didn't have any idea what a computer was.
Yes.
He came back a couple months later. The kids had not only learned how to use the computer, had learned a lot of English and also a whole bunch of biology, enough to ask really intelligent questions about the process of cell division and those sorts of things. So kids just need somebody to help them get started, and then they can run with it if they're inspired. And
Yes, it's one of the speakers I wanted to have on the summit, and the timing didn't work out. But yes, that was a very, very cool experiment he did.
he's one of my heroes. I
Yes,
just really admire the things that he's been able to
prove
demonstrate.
and done. Yeah, yeah, one day. What are the required ongoing commitment that parents have to think about when they're starting a homeschooling
Well,
journey?
this gets back to mindset again, and the current mindset is you've got to go to grade school so you can be prepared to go to high school. You have to go to high school so you can prepare to go to college.
Mm,
You got to go to college and get that degree so you can get a good job. If you accept that mindset, then yes, you need to follow the standard course of the things that the college supposedly is requiring you to know in order to get into college. But is that really the right thing for children today? I mean, maybe 20 years ago, maybe 30 years ago, that made sense. But now, with $1.5 trillion of student loan debt, with so many people that have college degrees working at Starbucks and places where they never even needed a college degree to begin with,
mhm,
um, I think a parent really needs to give some serious thought nowadays to, is that the right course to go?
mhm,
Uh, the statistics are overwhelming when you look at the people that go to college. First of all, 60% of them never graduate.
mhm,
And yet they still have student loan debt. Some of them lots and lots of student loan debt and never even get a degree. And
mhm,
of those that do actually graduate, another 60 to 70% say they've gotten virtually no value out of the degree that they've got. Now, that could be because they picked a really useless sort of degree to get, and that there are no jobs that necessarily relate to that, and that I can't speak to that. But the statistics show that about 9% of those people that actually graduate from college get enough value out of their degree to think that it was worthwhile going. And that's tragic,
yes,
especially if you think in terms of the fact that some of these kids are going to literally be saddled with student loan debt till they die.
I know.
And then their family's going to be settled with it after that, from what I understand. So, um, so it really boils back to mindset. If you find that the child is really interested in making things or whatever,
Mhm.
maybe a trade is truly a better route for them to look at. Maybe making furniture, maybe being an electrician, maybe I don't know. There's infinite number of possibilities if you get past that idea, I've got to have this piece of paper in order to be successful, because that's not true anymore.
Yeah, yeah. It's hard to change that core value or mindset we have because we've been driven like that by our parents, right? They said, "What are you going to be from a young age? You know, when are you going to choose to become who you want to be, right?" Or they chose it for you, right? Like some parents even tell you, you need to be a doctor or engineer from a young age, and you're like carrying this burden, like I better get there, otherwise I
Yeah,
will be in trouble.
yeah, yeah.
Right?
Here
So how do you get over that mindset? Because it's in us, all of us, right? It's embedded because we're part of that, we're results of those, that kind of path, right?
sure. um, there is no easy answer to that. We try and help with that to a certain extent at the association. We've got a 10.5 hour video, what we call homeschool teacher course. It's really not about teaching parents how to be teachers, because they've already been teachers. If they
Mm.
have children, they've been teaching their children everything since the day they were born. So people are natural teachers. What the course does is it helps them get past this mindset. It's basically hundreds of clips from people like Shigatra Mitra and others that are just really smart and really understand what learning is all about, what education is all about. And it helps parents to make the shift from the idea that they've got to follow this path, and it kind of opens their eyes. And we've gotten a lot of really good feedback from it. We also have an ebook that people can download that I think.
I read that book by written, and it's really really opened my eyes to a lot of things that I've been in the school system myself, and then I knew that I was aiming to the teaching to the middle, right? That didn't sit with me because I knew a lot of the other side. Like one of the examples I look at it is I'm not sure who came up with the analogy, but it's like playing bowling, right? You aim at the middle pins and then you try to get the other ones, right? It's similar how we teach in school.
Sure.
Hopefully we get the other kids too with the teaching that I'm going to aim at, right? So for me that didn't sit well, so I left classroom and I started my own journey where I can help in more empowering way online and one-on-one or in groups, right? But that is so important, that inspiration, that the child has to know what they're studying for, or why are they learning this, right?
Yeah,
Without that
exactly. If it's not interesting to them, they'll learn it long enough to pass the test, but then as soon as the test is over, studies have shown within 3 weeks they remember almost none of it.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. And in your book, you take the parents through the journey of the schooling, right? Yes, you said earlier how it started off, right? I mean, we need to understand the history of why it was there, the meaning of that. So then that's still continuing, but we're in a time frame where that doesn't make sense anymore.
yeah,
Yeah.
especially now with the internet. I mean, of
Yes.
course, if you take into account the fact that you could literally get a college education now for free online, because they're even Harvard will offer you free courses online. You don't get college credit for it unless you're registered with them and you pay the tuition. So you'll never get a piece of paper that shows that you did anything. But if you want to be an architect, you can sign on to some of the best universities on the planet, take their courses on architecture, learn everything you need to learn, go intern at an architecture firm,
Mm-hmm.
and be an architect. You don't need a $250,000 college degree piece of paper. But parents don't understand that, and because that's not the way it's been done. And so,
Yes.
yeah,
Yeah. Change is hard, right?
it is hard. Yeah, and I understand that.
Yeah, accepting it and dealing with it. I think COVID has put a new perspective. I think some of the psychologists that are on this summit have told me that they're seeing an influx of parents coming into them because they trusted the system. I'm not saying system does sometimes work for some kids, but a lot of kids don't, right? So those parents have not had the time to, really sit down with their kids and work that close to them.
Right.
before because their lives were different, right? But because of the lockdown, they had the opportunity to sit with them, and they're like, there's something wrong here. They can see it instantaneously, like they're not getting it. So they're coming for these psych ed analysis now to figure out, is there something wrong? They're concerned now, right? So I think the COVID has given parents some time to be with their kids in a way they wouldn't have otherwise because of the busyness, right?
Yeah. I'm getting calls too from some parents saying that my kid was struggling with math, for instance, for years and years and years. And when we actually started working on it one-on-one at home, he picked it up immediately. It was like, cha-ching, I figured it out. And they're like, why did it take 6 years for them why couldn't we get to this point? And they're realizing that, if a child believes that whoever's teaching them is really interested in helping them, and not to say that teachers don't, but how can you spread, how can you do that with 30 kids in a class or 25 kids in a class? But the fact that the parent is actually showing an interest in what they're doing and wanting to genuinely help them makes all the difference. It's like they can pick stuff up really fast.
Yeah. And over the years in the classroom, also, we have a lot of behavioral issues because, kids don't know why they're there, right?
Of course.
When you contain some people, like young people, into an environment where they don't have any idea, and they keep asking, I have my phone to learn many of the things you just told me. Why are you telling me, making me sit here to learn this? So we don't have an answer as a teacher, right? We're like, well, you have to, because that's what the curriculum says. And that's not a sufficient answer for a learner, right? No. So
I'm hearing that it's not a sufficient answer for a lot of teachers now too. I think I saw a study saying that over a fifth of the teachers are planning not to go back to school either this fall, besides the kids.
Yes.
They're fed up with the whole thing.
Yeah, it's hard to see that you're not doing the job you wanted to do, right? Like you were there to do. You started off as a teacher with this, such a dream to like deliver to all the kids, but then you don't. You can't.
Yeah, so. No, you can't, and it's the system. It's the way it's designed. It is, like I say, I think there are wonderful teachers out there. They just are so shackled by the system, they can't do what they need to do or what they want to do.
Yes. And along with the homeschooling, if I want to homeschool my child, comes that I need to deal with the laws and regulations of taking them out, right? Which is something you go over in your book a lot about it as well. But can you tell us, like, what should a parent do? I know it's state to state, it's different, country to country, it's different. Yeah. But what are some of the first steps we can?
Well, yeah, the first step, of course, would be to find out what your state requires. I think there's 24 states that either don't require you to even notify them. I think 14 states are like that. So you can just decide one day you want to homeschool and you don't have to tell anybody. And that's in 14 states. And I think another 12 states, something like that, require you to file papers saying that you're going to be homeschooling, but then the state doesn't keep count, doesn't monitor you, doesn't do anything. Now, the rest of them that have actually gotten onto the thing of, oh, let's regulate this, some of them are pretty tight in terms of exactly what you need to do and how you need to do it. And they've got all sorts of rules and regulations. So if you're in one of those states, you definitely need to check the local laws and try and stay in compliance. There's a couple of websites in particular. One's called homeschoolstatelaws.com. And the other one is, of course, the Homeschool Legal Defense Association, hslda.org. And they have a tab that says homeschooling in my state. And really, those would be the two places I would go as a parent first to look and see what they're saying. Of course, you can go to your own state website and try and read through all the laws yourself, but that can be challenging. So these two websites kind of put it into simple language so you can understand what it is you're up against.
I will list them for them. So I will list it for the listeners so they can go check it out for the states. And then, it's really important to get that checked out because, that's one of the, you need to report, right? Whatever it is, whatever is required, right? So it doesn't come at you.
Yeah, some aren't too bad. They require you to have the child tested every other year to show that
Okay.
they're still making improvement, and that's kind of the main thing that the states are interested in. But some of them are really strict about you have to log the number of hours that you spend teaching, and you need to do all sorts of things that look like you're doing basically school at home. And that's really unfortunate because in a homeschool environment, it only takes a couple hours a day to learn as much as they would during a whole day at school. Because I mean, let's face it, the average teacher can only spend 2 or 3 minutes with each child, a one-on-one time, if they have that opportunity at all. So by the end of the day, they've maybe talked to teachers for 20, 30 minutes. But if they can spend 2 hours or an hour, even an hour with their parents, really getting into something, they're going to learn a whole lot more. So a lot of the parents that we talk to are scared. Well, I don't have 6, 7 hours a day to devote to this. Well, you don't have to. Just find out what your child is interested in, encourage them to do those things, ask them questions, ask them, what is it you're excited about, and how, how are you going to go about learning more about that? And they'll do it. And if you spend a little bit of time in the evenings,
Yes. But
well,
that's only sitting down, right? But you said in the beginning also that learning happens everywhere. And I'm a big believer in that. It's going to
oh,
happen in grocery stores. It's going to happen in your car. It's going to happen when you go for a walk. It's going to
absolutely.
happen everywhere. So you can count those hours as well, because it doesn't always have to be sitting down with the
That's
worksheet.
no, that is absolutely true.
Yes.
And
Yeah. With math, especially, like one of the programs I have is, just skip the worksheets and just take the math on the go to the grocery store. You can teach tons of concept on the way to the grocery store and back and there, right?
okay.
So much. And in your kitchen, you can take all kinds of math lessons into the kitchen.
Oh, absolutely.
And
Baking in particular, you learn fractions and you start measuring
makes sense,
stuff out.
right?
Oh yeah, and
Makes sense.
that's why you need some of this stuff is because you need it when you're cooking. You need it. You can learn chemistry at the same time in the
Yeah.
kitchen. Kitchen's a great place to learn.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, every biology, everything. Yeah. So I always tell parents who are worried about, I can't spend 6 or 7 hours. We don't. You're actually going to spend 2, 3 hours max, if
oh,
anything, right? Going with that is curriculum, right? One of the biggest things that I'm hearing, as I started the summit is what curriculum people are parents are fixated on curriculum because that's what we know. We need to tick boxes because we can see the progress. We need to get a mark at the end so we can see the progress, right? But leaving that is a big leap
sure.
parents have to take when they do into the homeschooling. So what do you advise for that? For the mindset?
Well, like I said at the beginning, figuring out whether they want to go to the faith-based or the secular is the first thing. Then deciding whether they want to go with the textbooks and the worksheets or whether they want to kind of go with an eclectic collection of whatever it is that makes sense at the time. Um, so
How
there,
do you decide that? Is it following your student, like your child, let them, or do you like how do you figure that balance between all of that stuff? Like, how do I know as a fresh person into this homeschooling environment? Because it's
well,
just a
I
lot.
think it's more what you're comfortable with,
Okay.
um, because if you decide that you'd like to let the child learn what they want to learn, and you're just uncomfortable with the idea that they're only reading things about um,
Super. Yeah.
dinosaurs
Yeah.
or
Yeah. Leaves or something.
if that really is uncomfortable for you, then you need to look at other things that you would be more comfortable with. You should ask yourself why you're not comfortable with that, because if the child is happy and if he's learning and he's reading and he's excited about something, then the ideal in my mind is to inspire him to or her to use that interest in dinosaurs to learn about history and about math and about science, and how can you incorporate that in, because they're going to remember that because it's exciting to them. Where if you say, okay, well, let's set that aside for a couple of hours and let's go do this stuff. I know you don't want to do this stuff. I know you don't care about this stuff, but I'm more comfortable knowing that you've got this at least done. Um, I don't personally understand that mindset, but I know there are parents that are a lot more comfortable with that. Um, and it usually doesn't work well in a homeschool setting because eventually the child is like, just like they are in school. Why am I learning this? Why do I need to know this? And it becomes, it sets them up for failure again. So curriculum is tough. There's a lot of good packaged programs out there in both faith-based and secular. Um, uh, the,
Balance.
I'm sorry.
You have to find a balance
Yeah,
for
you have to find a
the
balance.
child and
What you're
yourself.
comfortable with.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very, very important. It's one of the most asked questions about
Oh yeah.
curriculum. What do I choose for curriculum? Where do I go, right?
We probably get 100 emails a day saying, what curriculum should we use? And we're actually trying to create a program that will be a list of like 25 questions that will ask parents, do you want to go faith-based? Do you want to go secular? And so on, to help them actually focus in and narrow down what they should be looking at. And then we're creating a database of all of the different materials that are available that hopefully when we get it all lined up, we can direct them to what it is that they should be doing based on their own choices. But we were working on that back in February when the pandemic hit and everything got stopped while we were just trying to field all of the calls and questions and things and interviews.
Yes, that would be awesome. That's a cool program to have, right? Because that is one of the, as I said, most asked questions, curriculum. So I want to talk about, this is one of the things that a lot of parents may know or may not know, but it's kind of, maybe we are blinded to it, maybe. But when I read your guide, the book you wrote, I was just like one after the other. I'm like, I've seen it, right? But it's less in different countries, it's less and more, it can be. But that is the hidden dangers of traditional schools.
Yeah, that's a subject that gets very uncomfortable for a lot of parents to look at because in their mind, their child is safe as soon as they drop them off at school and they'll be fine. Nothing bad ever happens at school. Um, but the reality is very, very different. If they look at the statistics, um, there's a very large number of children that are, for instance, exposed to sexual abuse at schools, not only by teachers, but by staff, by other students. As many as like 12 million children between the ages of kindergarten and before they graduate, they estimate will be exposed in one way or another to that. And the problem, the reason that nobody hears about that is because the schools do not want anything getting out to say that they had a teacher on their staff that was like this. So it's very, very common, and it's procedure and policy in many places to not discipline the teacher or the staff member or whatever, and just to keep it quiet and push them off to some other place to let them be their problem. And this happens all the time, unless it's just so obvious that it happened and so many people knew about it that they can't hide it, because you do see the stories all the time about but teachers that have done that or staff members. But the statistics show that the vast majority of the cases that happen never get reported. And in many, many cases, the children that are involved are shamed into saying, well, no, you can't talk about that. And so it's really a terrible situation. But and I almost hate to say this, but from a pedophile standpoint, if they're looking for an occupation to where they're going to have the most opportunities, what job would they pick? Of course, they're going to pick a job that works in or on children. So I don't want to give parents the idea that I believe that every school is full of these kind of people. But the fact is, I mean, even the Department of Education's own statistics will show you that millions and millions of children are exposed to this. Then, of course, there's the issues of violence. And you don't hear a lot of stories about violence in the schools, but the fact is, again, millions and millions of children are going to be either exposed to violence firsthand, or they're going to be involved in violence in one way or another during their time at school. And I'm sure some of the schools are just accept that the kids get into fights and this happens, but it's gotten worse over the last 10 years in particular, because kids are just not
Bored
happy. Yeah,
and bored in classrooms.
yeah, they're bored. And I mean, the whole concept of sitting for hours and hours a day with kids your own age doing exactly the same thing uh, is just psychologically it causes, or it almost forces coping mechanisms. And a lot of different coping mechanisms arise. They can start out at bullying, which is really common. Then it can go to social cliques, and those are extremely common. I mean, what school doesn't have their social cliques?
Yes.
And general defiance. The kids just, I don't want to do anything, just leave me alone, and I'm not going to listen to what you've got to say. And then there's teenage suicide has become a real problem. So those are some of the really serious hidden dangers. Of course, peer pressure. Kids are in fear all the time. The one thing, when we talk to children that come to like seminars and meetings that we have, we talk to the parents and ask them, what they're doing, how they're doing it. And then we talk to the kids and we say, are you still in public school? And if they say yes, my parents are thinking about homeschooling me, but we're still in public school. I'd ask, well, what's your day like? What concerns you the most about being at school? I said, well, most of the kids say I'm afraid all the time. And I'd ask, well, afraid of what? Said, well, what am I not afraid of? If I raise my hand in class, I risk the point of being humiliated if I give a wrong answer. If I walk down the halls, I'm afraid of getting tripped or beat up or laughed at or whatever. There's peer pressure. If I get a good grade, I'm afraid that my friends are going to think of me as some goody two shoes, or that I'm too smart for them or whatever. If I get a bad grade, I'm afraid to go home and tell my parents. I can't win. So it's just a bad situation all the way around.
Yeah, and being around, one of the things that home parents have been asked about is how do you socialize your kids, like if you're going to keep them home, right? But being around your same age group is not necessarily the only way to socialize, right?
Oh, gracious, no. Homeschool kids get to go out in the real world and meet kids, other kids of all ages at the park. Homeschool groups are very active. They usually used to be very active before COVID, but they used to meet up in the parks 2-3 times a week sometimes. And that would be kids of all ages that would play together and make study groups together and work together. And then they go to the grocery store, they meet all sorts of different people. And then of course there's all sorts of extracurricular activities that parents can get their homeschooled kids involved in, whether it's sporting groups or dance classes or gymnastics or you name it. There's all kinds of things for kids to get involved in. So the idea that they're not being socialized properly compared to kids that are stuck in the same room with the same age kids all day long every day, I kind of scratch my head at that, like, is this a serious question? So yeah, I think homeschooling is actually much better for socializing.
And because you're done your work so quickly, half of the time or less than that, and you're on the go, you have the opportunity to go out in your community and do things with other kids who are
not just socialize with them, but actually learn to see how things really work.
Yeah, the real world is.
The real world, yeah.
But and also I think that reduces the peer pressures and stuff, because you're not in that group, when you're all one age group, it kind of puts, you're all working with the same hormones and same energy levels, right? Then it's a conflict almost,
Yeah,
isn't it? Like
yeah,
if you have variety,
yeah.
then you
And
can work through it.
there's a guy by the name of Alfie Cohen who did a study on competition and
Mm,
came to understand that competition really is not that good. If you can go to a collaborative sort of mindset instead of a competition like they have in the schools, you're in competition permanently with everybody else in your class to get that grade because you're on a bell curve and only a certain number of people are going to get the A's, whether you're all really smart or not. You're still only going to have a certain number of them that are going to get A's, but uh, from a standpoint of homeschooling, you don't have competition. You don't have to worry about being better than the others. You just need to learn what it is that's important to you, and
yeah,
so
care.
much more comfortable.
Yeah, healthy
Oh,
first.
yeah, yeah, it's a good way.
Yes, yes. And you guys arrange social groups, right? That's one of the
Yeah.
things that you do in your organization, right? How does that work for homeschooling parents?
We came up with a cute little acronym called PODS, and it stands for Parent Organized Discovery Sites, which is a
Nice.
fancy way of saying a group of homeschooling families that get together and host each other's kids. Now,
Nice.
this is not legal in all states. Unfortunately, there are a few states that if you have more than one other homeschooled child working with you at the same time, then you have to register as a private school, and it
Oh,
gets
wow.
all complicated.
Mhm.
But that's only in a few places. So we're able to help a lot of other families in a lot of other places by we've got a program on our site where you type in saying I live at this place and I do this kind of homeschooling, interested in families that are doing similar sorts of things, because if they have uh, if you have a group that's faith-based, sometimes they don't necessarily want to be in groups with ones that aren't because it's just the discussion between the kids is not what the parents are looking for at this point in time.
Mhm.
Anyway, we help them. They fill out the form. They put that into the system, and then if you're interested in being in a group, you go in there and say, "I'm looking for a pod in this area, this zip code," and it'll come up and say, "Okay, we've got 7 different groups that are forming. This one's got 2 members that are interested. This one's got 6, and so this one's about ready to launch because they've got more than 5. Because ideally, if you've got at least 4 or 5 families, then they can all go to one house on Mondays and a different house on Tuesdays and so forth and so on. And the parent that has that day off, like let's say John has Mondays off, so all the kids go to John's house on Monday. John's responsibility is to make sure that they're all safe. Nobody runs out in the road and gets hit and have a problem. They all get to eat their lunch that they bring along at a certain time. If somebody does get in a scuffle with each other, then John's there to settle that. But otherwise, John can teach math if he's a math wizard and it's something he would enjoy doing, but he doesn't have to. The parents the night before will tell their kids, okay, you're going to John's house tomorrow. You're going to be with all of these different aged kids and you're going to be able to talk about things, whatever you want. But we'd like you to focus on this, this, and this, because these are some areas that we want to talk to you about later in the evening when we get home from work. And so they go and they have fun, they play for a while, they work on their stuff for a while, they eat lunch, and it's a great way to socialize, but they also learn from each other, which is really interesting because all the different kids have their own interests and things that some of the kids have never even thought of before. Like, I never thought about,
Collaborate.
yeah, whatever. So they talk about it, and you can't do that in a classroom setting at school. It's like you've got to listen to the teacher, and then you've got to be quiet, and then you've got 6 minutes between classes that you can actually talk to people, and that's always about things that are non-educational for the most part. So
Mm.
it's a really good situation, and we've had a lot of success with the pods.
Wow. So the purpose of the pod is to give a one parent a break or some parent a break, that as well as to collaborate with the kids and get them working together and
Right.
social.
Yeah, usually a parent will only have to spend 1 day a week hosting the kids, and otherwise other people will host the kids during the other days. So, and we have some pods where there's as many as 15 families in there, and so each family has to host only one time every 3 weeks. So it becomes a really easy situation for most of them, and they get it works really well.
Yes. And then one of the things that will come out of that, I mean, especially the who are in the lawmaking, is that safe? You're sending your kids to now to somebody else's house. How is that safe, right? Does that come up in this conversation?
Sure, and you certainly, if you're considering getting in a pod, a parent needs to go meet the other people and talk with them, and not necessarily jump right into it. Although right now we're getting frantic calls saying we're supposed to go back to work. My husband and I both
Mm.
work full time. We're supposed to be back next week, and we have no idea where to send our kids. We don't want to have to go study daycare facilities, because what are they going to, we're going to put a 12-year-old in a daycare? No, it's not going to work. So what do we do? And so we've been really trying to help a lot of these people form groups quickly. And will they all work? No, they won't. We've had some situations where parents will get into it for 2 or 3 days, and the kids will come home and they'll tell the parents what they did. And they'll go, that other kid told you that? No. We don't want you involved in that. So they pull
Oh,
them out.
there's supervision. You have to supervise what's
Yeah,
happening
of
on
course.
this
Yeah.
side. Yes, of course. So this is a really good one because right now with what's happening, right? I know, like, if the parents want to go back to work, they really need somebody to be physically there if they're not old enough, the kids. But for all older kids like this on a Zoom or something, even collaborating like this, if we're not allowed to meet each other, like, it opened up a door, right? Like now we can go
Yeah,
on platforms like this and connect.
absolutely. No, it's great. And,
Yeah. So the pods can also form and meet online.
yes. Oh, yeah. They do a lot of that. And there's a lot of classes that are being taught, like you say, by Zoom, not
Mm.
necessarily through the schools, but other things that kids are interested in. So we'll have whole groups of kids that'll sign up for a class and just all sit around the computer and listen. And then when the class is over, they'll sit and talk about it. And it's really a neat thing. It's very collaborative, and there's no competition between them. It's like we all want to learn this, and it's exciting and it's fun, but we're not worried that you're going to get the A and I'm not, and that we're going to get in
Mm.
trouble because we didn't do our homework. And it's just really a neat thing to see.
Yeah. So the pod will also work for, as you said, for working parents. Like that's one of the concerns people are bringing up. I have to work. I can't
Yeah,
do homeschooling, but I don't want to send them back, or I would like to try homeschooling, but how do I do it when I have a full-time job? Yeah.
exactly. Yeah, that's why we designed them in the first place, was for full-time working parents and single parents in particular.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. So that they could find that on your website as well, right? Those pods
Yeah.
to get access to. Awesome. And then the last question is I want to ask you is you homeschooled your kids, and you've been part of this. You started the homeschooling association, right? As well. So what is your advice for parents right now today, in this environment where a lot of uncertainties and just our world sometimes seems upside down, right? In a lot of people's mind. So moving forward, back to school looks way different than it used to be, right? We were concerned about what binders to buy and what clothes to buy. Now it's not that this year. It's different. So what is your advice for them?
If you're seriously looking at helping your children through this time, learn how, help them learn how to learn. Because at schools, they teach you what to learn. They tell you what you need to know, but not how to think, or what it is that you need to do to learn how to learn things. And finding out their learning style can be really important in terms of if they're a visual learner or an auditory learner, because if they've determined that they're just not an auditory learner at all, then sending them back to school is really not a good idea, because most learning in schools happens with a lecture. test, lecture test sort of system. And if a child just can't pick up things without having something in their hands to manipulate, a kinesthetic learner, or being able to read it or see it visually and as a visual learner, if they're strictly an auditory learner, then school is not going to work for them when it comes right down to it. They really, really should focus on the idea of homeschooling. So learning their learning style, helping them to learn how to learn are probably the two greatest things that they can do for their child. And the other thing that is really tough for a lot of parents to understand and grasp is if they are seriously thinking of doing homeschooling for real, it's going to take their child a while to get past the programming that they've gotten at the public schools. The whole concept of doing everything for grades, for
time bell.
Yeah, it's we call it defragging. That's probably a bad thing to say because that's what you do to a computer. But when I pulled my son out of second grade, it took him 6 months literally before he wanted to look at anything educational, because he had gotten to the point where he used to just absorb stuff like a sponge. And then after a couple of years of school, he would come home and say, I would say, how's school? And do you have any homework? And they said, I don't want to talk about it. I'm going to go watch TV. I don't want to talk about any of this stuff. I'm not interested. And it was like, wow, what happened to our child? And it literally took 6 months of him not doing anything, literally just doing whatever it was he wanted to. And then finally one day he came back and said, I used to watch these documentaries about dinosaurs. Can we get some of those? Can we rent them at the store or whatever? And it's like, he's back. There it is. He's doing it because he wants to learn. And from that point on, it was magic again. But it's really tough to watch a kid just kind of flounder for a while. But if you force them, say, we have to do this because you're going to fall behind, or you're not going to learn what you need to learn, you're just going to get resistance. And it's going to that joy of learning needs to come back for the sake of learning. And it takes a while. I think for every year that a child has been in the public school system, they say it can take up to a month of just doing nothing to be able to get that joy of learning back, or even the interest in learning.
So during that time, did you feel like, oh, what am I going to do with this child? Like what would we feel as a parent? We're like, oh, am I doing something wrong? One of the biggest thing that's going across all social media right now is like, am I going to screw up my kid's future? Right, that's kind of the mindset again, right? That comes up. Did you screw up your son's future?
No. I think he's doing great, but
awesome.
I find that to be a really interesting question, and it kind of dovetails into another question in that parents say, well, I don't think I'm smart enough to teach my kids. Say, well, if you went through the public school system and you don't think you're smart enough to teach your kids, why do you want to send your kids to that same system?
Nice one.
So,
the question to think about.
Yeah. Yes. So,
thank you. Yeah, that is, that'll take a couple of days to answer.
Yeah, exactly.
You do really have to reflect on that, right? Because it is true. If you haven't learned it, and if you're not good enough, and why are you sending your kids to somewhere you never got?
Yeah, you think the schools have improved since you went to them? No, that is not the case. So anyway, that does make parents sit back and think a little bit. And with all of the resources that are available online now that we didn't have when we were going through school.
Floppy disk, I remember.
So what if you don't know how to do algebra? There's 1,000 programs online that you can get your kids involved in, many of them free. That just work with them and watch over their shoulder, say, wow, that's really interesting. What are you doing? Can you explain that to me? How does that work? It's Shagatra Mitra again, calls that the grandmother technique. And just wow, that's exciting. And it gets the kids excited, and they'll learn it.
Yes. And it's not that you have to really teach your kids, it's about you spending the time with them to figure it out.
That's
right?
that's all kids really want when it boils down to it. I mean, if you think about, we talked to a lot of kids that have just graduated from high school because they come to us saying, is there anything that you can help us with now that we were through this program, and now we'd like to go into other things. But anyway, they say, I ask them, well, what do you remember most from high school? I said, the parties, time with my friends. So tell me something you learned, something that excited you, that got you interested. And almost without fail, they would say, we always learned things long enough to take the test, but then we really had no interest in keeping it. So, we can generally give you some ideas of some of the stuff we talked about. Like we talked about wars, and okay, well, let's talk about a war. Pick a war. The Civil War. Do you remember anything about Civil War? That was the first one, right? And I was like, no, this is not good. But,
so and they probably got a grade on that for B or something. You could have had a B grade, but still can talk about it.
Yeah, exactly. So it's the things, it's the conversations that they had, the experiences that they had that they remember. And almost all adults are like it. If you ask them what they remember from school, they don't remember anything. They don't remember anything at all.
Yeah. And that's why a lot of people, I work with a lot of kids who struggle with math, and that's why math is even worse, is because they feel it as it's such a dry subject, there's nothing to talk about. But I tell them that there's so much to talk about, let's talk about it, right? When I actually, in an hour of coaching, we have a lot of conversation about it, that they'll remember that to remember the math concept, not the math concept. We don't talk about that.
Yeah.
We talk about how it fits and how it, so it's a therapy for them to learn it that way, right? Like by talking. I even say, talk to your brain. When I'm not with you, you're going to talk to your brain. It'll have answers. It'll have answers for you. So it's powerful. It's powerful to have that conversation with you. And I think that is the thing that we kind of was on a fast pace as parents and missing it because our life got so busy. Yep. And I think one of the biggest blessings that COVID have done is given us that pause to kind of reflect during those 2 months, right? And maybe future, who knows, right? But that's what I'm noticing with a lot of the people I work with, is they're realizing that what were we running for?
Yeah.
Like, what is the speed for?
Yeah.
Thank you so much for all your advice and all your insight.
Thank you.